Welcome to Butcher Block Horror Podcast, where we exhume horror movies from the past and cut into what makes them so delectable. I'm Kane.
I am JD.
And I am Joe.
And today we're going to be discussing horror comedies.
Comedy and horror special.
We're doing a special episode where we're just talking about horror comedies. We're gonna dig into what makes it tick a little bit.
And what makes us tickled by it.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
That's where we're at with that. We're not digging up any movies to cut up for you. We're digging up an entire genre to cut up for you.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And we're going to force feed it to you.
Yeah. Our favorite portions force-fed to you, our unwitting victims. If you enjoy the taste of these feasts of fright, then give us a like and subscribe, being sure to click the bell on YouTube. You can also go to our website, wegiveYouBrainworms.com. Here, you can find a link to our Patreon and our Discord community channel, where we would love to engage with you on all manner of bizarro things. You can also send bizarre questions and bizarre pictures to our Instagram so that JD can take a gander.
Well, I normalize that kind of shit, so...
He will look at whatever you send him.
Yeah, I'm going to look at it. I'll respond. We'll have a conversation. There'll be an open dialogue, and we'll figure your life out. I'll get you right. I'll get you right.
An open dialogue.
If you have any weird warts, rashes, skin lesions, or boils, JD is a licensed dermatologist and will be happy to look at those for you.
Especially the boils.
That's his favorite part.
Yeah.
As long as they're oozing. He doesn't like it if they're...
Open sores like plague boils, bubonic plague.
Yeah, the more pus,
buboes.
the
Yeah,
Right.
Those are interesting.
That makes sense.
Oh, God. I'm just gonna delete all our DMs immediately.
All right, well, this format's going to be a little different from our normal tango.
Or is it?
Yeah,
Joe is going to talk first about the origins of horror comedy.
I am.
And, honestly, I don't think I've read very much horror comedy.
Yeah.
Just in general. I don't think I've ever read it. I think it's pretty much always been...
It feels obscure.
Like a musical,
Sure.
Like I've seen horror comedy musicals, and I've seen tons of horror comedy movies, but I can't really recall ever reading a horror comedy book.
Yeah.
Yep. As a licensed nerd, I am fully qualified to talk about this subject.
Yay! Come on.
You should massage our eardrums with your creamy tones.
Creamy.
Creamy. That said, I am going to try to keep this brief.
No.
We're not a book podcast, we're a movie podcast. So I don't want to talk about literature for too long. If you want to hear us talk about books, you can check out our sibling podcast, Brainworms, and we'll talk about books a whole bunch.
Not the books you want, though.
No. But still books.
Yeah. Lots of books. Not the books you want.
Books from Bizarro Land.
It's true.
I wish. Bizarro Land would be fun.
Yeah. But anyway, the idea of mixing the macabre and the kind of absurd or the humorous honestly goes back as far as ancient Greek and Roman mythology had a ton of that, Zeus getting into wacky hijinks and people escaping from the land of the dead, that kind of shit. And that went on into, the Norse peoples, and pretty much any sort of indigenous culture had some variations of like tricksters who would fool demons or some kind of horrific shit that would be outsmarted by sort of this like a Nazi the spider, that kind of thing.
Right.
I just had a crazy visualization. You made me imagine the scene of myself sitting in a bathhouse, scribbling on some papyrus with whatever they used back then, and just, jotting down one of my nightmares.
Are you on peyote right now?
I'm not.
Better yet, are you going to quickly tell us what this nightmare was?
Well, no. I'm going to leave that to the listener's imagination. But sorry, Joe, to interrupt you. I apologize.
No, you're fine. That's what we're here for.
It'll never happen again.
No, it's supposed to happen, JD.
Yeah. This is a conversation, not an essay.
An open dialogue.
Yeah. We're all friends here.
It's not a lecture. It's a conversation.
That's the word I was trying to think of. Thank you.
I know it was. I came in to save you.
You can be my hero, baby.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Tradition continued into the folklore of the early Americas dealing with, stories of the devil.
The devil.
Being like, he's this evil monster that wants to take your soul, but he's also kind of a buffoon.
Give me your soul.
Is that so they could be less afraid of him?
I think so. Like we've kind of had this conversation in other subjects, but this idea that you can defeat evil by making it look stupid.
Okay.
I think that's kind of that psychology because there were all of these stories. And again, I'm kind of going general rather than specific so I can move from subject to subject quickly, that were just like, somebody outsmarted the devil because he was just this buffoon who was easy to trick.
Seems like a lot of sinister behavior to be a buffoon.
Yeah.
That's like a lot of calculation.
And
goes
he's got
into
he's got a serious long game as well.
It's true.
For someone that's a buffoon.
You could be an ignorant prick, but when we're talking like devil level, stuff, that's like some well-calculated stuff, I guess. If you're listening to, those stories.
And those ideas also existed in the theater of the Elizabethan era. Shakespeare was very fond of like, here's some spooky shit with like witches and devils. But then like some kind of silly comedy moment happens to kind of break that up.
Right.
Which, and, arguably kind of some of the ideological source of, the kind of horror comedy that we see, in movies right now.
You have to laugh in the face of death.
It's true.
What
It's
else
true.
can you do? Because it's
Right.
this inevitable thing. There's death, there's taxes. It's like you're going to pay the piper eventually. So you just got to laugh about it.
And those ideas continued. Edgar Allan Poe was pretty renowned for having kind of comical moments in the midst of his horror.
Quips.
Yeah.
Right.
There are a couple of, like, I wouldn't call it a horror comedy, but there are humorous moments even in Bram Stoker's Dracula that kind of show that those two ideas can coexist.
Like the stuff interacting with Renfield.
Yeah, exactly like that.
Do you guys feel like the Raven was like kind of trolling the character it was plaguing?
I do.
There's some kind of like comedy to that in a weird sense, like just being
Some
fucked with.
Butthole Raven.
Yeah,
Right.
just tapping at your cellar door.
And like apparently, going to what you were saying, some of the stuff that to modern readers seems like dark and spooky, like some of those moments like the Raven, apparently in his time were kind of comedic and silly. And that was the point.
Yeah.
I mean, it's awfully dramatic to be asking if there's balm in Gilead,
Yeah.
Like that's pretty fucking balls to the wall. Is there balm in Gilead? Like that's...
Yeah.
So I think that attributing that to the time, like we don't really speak like that anymore.
Right. So
And
we miss some of those jokes.
Speak for
Exactly.
yourself.
You don't
Always.
speak like that, JD.
You're right. You're right.
I mean, it's only been what, Joe, like 8 months since he started using words instead of just guttural, like
It's true.
just utterances and bizarre gestures.
slapping my own genitals just to be able to make a sound.
Well, I mean, you still do that all the time.
Yeah. And giggle. And, these ideas continued. They completely skipped over H.P. Lovecraft, who was the most humorless writer I can think of.
And the most dead racist.
Yeah,
And he's a famous dead racist, yeah.
he is. But yeah, no, I don't remember being...
Yeah, no, that man experienced no
I
joy.
don't remember. I've read a lot of Lovecraft.
Yeah, completely joyless.
He doesn't take the time to tickle us.
But then his ideas were used, later on in like Herbert West Reanimator and those kinds of things. Like, oh yeah, you can find humor in those ideas, and that's fun. And yeah, that continued into the modern day. Stephen King always has quite a few, comedic moments
Absolutely.
throughout his novels. He's having a good time. Even in the midst of, like, Stephen King is very good at some kind of dark, violent shit happening. And he gets some kind of goofball quip out of it.
Well, even his most infamous killer is a clown. I mean, that's like steeped in comedy right there,
It's true.
Well, I mean, that's an entire discussion, though,
Right.
about the It clown and its relationship to being like a buffoon or...
Yeah. Can we watch the Tim Curry It film at some point? Is that on brand for this podcast? 'Cause
Hell
I think
yeah.
that might be fun.
That would be fun.
I mean, that's like 4 hours.
That's true.
It's like 4 hours.
But talking about it isn't going to take 4 hours.
Right, but I mean, it's 4 hours of a mini series squashed into a movie, essentially.
Right.
And we're gonna have to deal with the acting from all the kids, and I'm not gonna say that Seth Green isn't fantastic in it, because he is.
Mhm.
But I mean, I think Jonathan Brandis is not great. It's
Sure.
really hard to watch.
I get that.
The kid that plays Eddie is also really hard to watch. The kid that plays Mike is pretty decent. He's still not great. He's still like uncomfortable saying his lines, and it's obvious, and it bothers me.
Sure.
Like, really, the only reason to watch 1990 It is for Tim Curry.
Right.
Tim Curry is quite the most wonderful It, in my opinion.
Yes, absolutely. And the overacting from Annette O'Toole, it's so hard to watch. It's so hard to watch.
But yeah, pulling the train back onto track. I'm almost done talking about my nerd bullshit, I promise.
Yeah. Get your nerd shit out of the way, geek. And then give me your lunch money.
Oh, man, don't push me in the locker again.
No, you're getting a wedgie, atomic
Kane,
wedgie.
watch this. Watch this. I'm going to slap his books down out of his hands.
Well, tell us, buddy. Come on.
Yeah,
nerd.
well, JD is bullying me.
No, I did it.
I
I just
wanted to give
did
him
it.
time.
Are you hungry, nerd? You want a knuckle sandwich?
Give me your lunch money fresh. But yeah, my personal favorite example of horror and comedy mingling is the 90s young adult book series Goosebumps.
Okay.
And, in the very present day, David Wong's John Dies at the End series is heavily horror comedy.
Okay. I liked the movie.
The books are better than the movie in most ways.
Well, I mean, that's generally how it works.
Right.
Too. Except for Lair of the White Worm.
Yeah. I mean, neither was good, but I guess the movie was better by virtue of being shorter.
The movie was just better in general.
I don't know if that's true.
I mean, we can fight on that hill if you want, but the villain from that movie is just fantastic. She's
Sure.
so good.
The
She's such a
movie
good villain.
had the most monobrow in it. I will give it that much credit. It had
You just
more.
hate Hugh Grant. That's really all it is.
It had more monobrow than the book.
It's because you hate Hugh Grant. Just say that. Say Lair of the White Worm would have been great if they would have cast anyone but Hugh Grant.
I would agree with that.
There you go. See, that's all you had to say. That's all you had to say. Now the listeners know that you just hate Hugh Grant.
But I devilishly tricked you into saying it for me.
I mean, I don't know,
Yeah,
whatever.
smarted you, Kane.
Yeah, not hard.
But
to
yeah,
do.
that's it. That's all I have to say on that subject.
All right. Well, then why don't we dive into what really matters? And
Nothing else matters.
that's not true. We're going to talk about its origins in film.
Oh, man.
JD, why don't you light that fire for us?
Come on, JD, light that fire.
All right, sorry. All right, yeah, comedy and horror. As far as its origins in films go, the earliest film in my research dates back to March 14th of 1920 with a film titled Haunted Spooks. So obviously this is a silent film, and it's noted as an American gothic/horror comedy, produced and directed by Hal Roach and co-directed by Alfred J. Golding. I feel like I need to talk about this movie a bit because I read a hell of a lot about it, and I feel like as soon as I start kind of dicing up the synopsis and giving a lot of details, you're gonna see like a lot of overlap into the future. It's almost like I could be talking about a film made in 2020 because it's just like, I don't know.
What about a film made in 2021?
Well, I said 2020 because this was made in 1920, so I figured like 100 years later, yeah.
No.
It was like a bookends.
Yeah. Booking's great.
So yeah, anyway.
I'm just being a dick.
I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about Haunted Spooks, being that
Yeah,
it's
do it.
really probably the first horror comedy film in film. So this young lady learns that she's getting an inheritance, this large plot of land and a house somewhere in the South, providing that she live there for a year with her husband.
Okay.
And this lady is played by actress Mildred Davis. The stipulation is that she's married. At this point, when she finds this out, she is single as could be. Her uncle finds this out and decides that he's gonna, whenever she shows up to the house with whoever she marries, he's gonna go there and scare the shit out of her before the year ends to try to cheat her out of her prize. And the thing is, like I said, she doesn't have a husband. So cut to this other character. He is a young man having some real serious lady issues. And he's portrayed by Harold Lloyd. He's wanting love and having a horrible time finding it. He turns to suicide. And he makes a bunch of failed attempts. Like, he's just, so like...
He's so bad at everything that he's even bad at suicide.
He's so bad at everything. He cannot find a lover. He's just fed up with this existence. He's like, I'm done. I just don't even want to live if I can't be in love. So he starts trying to kill himself. All these failed attempts, totally goofy shit. Like, an example of it is like he jumps off a bridge but lands in a boat. So there's a twist of fate that occurs. The lawyer who delivered the telegram about the young woman's inheritance finds the young guy at the end of one of his suicide attempts, and he hooks the two of them up. Keep in mind, they're not officially married yet. She fills him in on what's going on. They move into the property together, so they become acquainted. Well, not really. They
Right.
just quickly decide to like, okay, well, we want this property. I'm going to help her out. So they move into the property together. And
So real quick, are we going to do a synopsis or are you just going to tell us the whole plot?
well, that's pretty much what I wanted to do, was just kind of talk about the movie a little bit. So anyway, yeah.
Just ignore him, JD. Do what you want. Live your truth.
Live, laugh, love, baby. Live, laugh, love.
Live, laugh, love.
It's kind of funny. So they go and they move into the house, and at the end, it kind of shows them walking into the bedroom together.
Nice.
And that's when they finally decide
That's
to
racy.
exchange each other's like information, like names. Like, what's your name, by the way?
Oh, wow. Okay.
In 1920, that was like Emma's for mature shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like fascinated when I started reading all that. I'm like, wow, that sounds like, all the failed love attempts. And it kind of reminded me of like Shaun of the Dead a little bit. And like, I don't know, there was just something like kind of pitiful about his character that he was like, I don't know, super love.
Well, I mean,
the
the
film.
inherited castle, mansion, villa, like,
Yeah.
that's standard.
Oh, yeah,
throughout
yeah.
horror, especially in like the 40s, 50s, and 60s. That was like
And I
super popular.
Exactly. And I was even going to mention, I mean, I know this isn't film, but like even the Three Stooges in those, short films that they'd come up with, there were all sorts of like their Halloween episode. It was almost always like, oh, there was this inheritance and there's this haunted mansion and you just have to go and stay there for X amount of time. And then there's some prize at the end, And that's kind of like a trope that's carried through a lot of horror films, not just in comedy, but in horror in general.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm still in the 20s, still talking about the 1920s, several more comedy horror films. The Haunted House in 1921. Then there was Dr. Pickle and Mr. Pride. That's kind of like obviously a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde spoof in 1925. The Monster, also in 1925. The Bat in 1926. And there's a few other titles bordering on the mystery genre. They kind of like, moving toward the 30s, when you start adding sound into film, mystery thrillers kind of became like a very predominant genre. And a lot of it was connected to horror, because I don't think horror in film was mature enough. So there was a little bit of these comical type of films. So, okay, we get to October 20th of 1932 with a film called The Old Dark House. Directed by James Whale, distributed by Universal Pictures, and this film stars Boris Karloff and a bunch of other big names from the era. Universal, somewhere between making Frankenstein and The Invisible Man. Actually, the Invisible Man is noted as a horror comedy.
Interesting.
That came out in 1933. So, this old dark house film that sort of was like slotted in between Frankenstein and The Invisible Man in the Universal Pictures timeline. That got a lot of credit and was well renowned as a horror comedy. So yeah, in the whole comedy and horror genre, there were a few remakes based off films from the silent era that were considered comedies. An example of that would be The Cat and the Canary and The Gorilla. Both originally horror comedy silent films. They came out in 1927. Both were remade in the talking era in 1939.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. A big title in 1940 was The Ghost Breakers, directed by George Marshall.
That was with Bob Hope, right?
Exactly. A young
Nice.
Bob Hope and Paulette Goddard. And that was based off a play from 1909 of the same title, The Ghost Breakers. Having known comedians star in horror films during the talking era became a thing, and an example being Hold That Ghost in 1941, starring Bud Abbott and Lou Costello.
They're going to find themselves a lot in this, in this episode.
That is where I'm going. That was the wind up and the pitch, because these two, they start rocking out fucking comedy horror films left and right. So lots of funny, murder mysteries in the 1940s as well. But in the late 40s, early 50s, we get a string of horror comedy where the duo of Abbott and Costello meet literally every fucking universal monster there is. First, they meet Frankenstein.
Do they meet and fuck the universal monsters? Is that what I just heard you say?
No, this is Abbott and Costello,
they meet them like MEAT.
Oh.
They turn them into food.
Yeah, they just...
Okay.
I would like to say, though,
pork
that,
or something.
So
like
Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein is a little misdirecting.
Oh, yeah?
Because Abbott and Costello in the movie meet Frankenstein, which the opening credits to that film are always going to be, in my mind, one of the best opening credits to a horror movie ever.
Okay.
All of the text is formed by mist, and it's like early animation. It's so good. It's so
That sounds cool. I'll have to look that up at some point.
But they also meet fucking Bela Lugosi as Dracula and Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman.
That's pretty cool.
So it's not just Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. I'm sorry I stole your thunder, but that was one of my favorite movies of all time, dude.
Yep.
I was obsessed with that movie. I probably watched that movie once a week from the age of like 9 till 11. I still want to watch that movie. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, and actually, you named Bela Lugosi. He played Dracula. Lon Chaney Jr. played the Wolfman, but Glenn Strange played Frankenstein's monster in that film.
Oh, shit. I didn't even know that. I always thought it was Boris Karloff.
No, that was actually, Glenn Strange.
Are you sure it wasn't Tony Danza?
Hold me close. I'm Tony Danza.
Yeah.
They eventually meet the Invisible Man, and that happened in 1951. They also met the Killer in 1951, played by Boris Karloff.
Real quick, do you think it's because they didn't get to meet him as Frankenstein that they met him as the Killer, Boris Karloff?
They had to meet him as someone.
Right.
Absolutely.
He's too much of an icon not to get involved.
Absolutely.
Who better than the Killer?
Yeah.
So they meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 1953. Then they meet the Mummy in 1955. So, I mean, that's pretty much, the big wigs in the Universal Pictures line. And here's a little interesting tidbit moving more into the 60s. This was kind of a mindfuck for me. I didn't realize that The Little Shop of Horrors with Rick Moranis was a remake.
Yes.
I'm going to sound like a
Absolutely.
dumbass. I had no idea. I feel foolish now.
You shouldn't.
So the original came out in 1960. Directed by Roger Corman.
Yep.
Horror legend Roger Corman.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole Little Shop of Horrors concept was thought to be based on the story written by John Collier in 1932 called Green Thoughts. So yeah, Roger Corman did a lot of cool shit. Also directed A Bucket of Blood.
Which is also a fantastic horror comedy.
Yeah, that's why I'm talking about it. And that was
Called a segue, Kane.
You know what? Fuck off. All right. I just wanted to talk about the fact that it's good.
Yeah, no doubt. So that came out in 1959, and it had a $50,000 budget.
Holy shit.
And it was filmed in 5 days.
Dude, we found a movie that was a little bit more expensive than Carnival of Souls, but completed in 5 fucking days?
Yeah.
5 days with a $50,000 budget. That's madness. That's fucking
bonkers.
Yes.
Jinx, you owe me a Coke.
Punch buggy. All right, never mind. So yeah,
Fucking dorks.
Corman also directed a film with a hella sick fucking title called Creature from the Haunted Sea.
I've
in
never seen this.
1961. Yeah, I kind of want to see it now. It makes me clamor with excitement.
Does it make you shiver with anticipation?
I would say. The Old Dark House in 1963, this time directed by William Castle. And the film was based on the 1927 novel by J.B. Priestley titled, oh, Jesus.
It's a weird name.
Yeah, it's a weird name.
Nope. I'm going to cut that out so I can repeat it. The film...
Don't tell me what to do.
Sorry. You can do whatever you want. I'm just going to repeat it.
Yeah.
The film was based on the 1927 novel by J.B. Priestley titled Benighted.
Interesting.
Indeed.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's important to touch down on this. And there was a movie
something you
that
can touch
came
down
out.
on.
I understand that your mind believes that, but I would have to disagree with you. In 1966, there was a Munsters film.
Yes.
The famed TV show, the sitcom, and it was called Munster Go Home, directed by Earl Bellamy, who also directed a good number of the television episodes for the Munsters. And I don't believe there was an Addams Family movie during that time, but Addams Family is kind of a contemporary of the Munsters as far as sitcoms go, and I loved the Addams Family. Oh my God.
Was there ever a crossover between the Addams Family and the Munsters? Because I feel like there should have been.
There really should have been, and
I don't think there
loved
was,
Carolyn Jones. That was the original Morticia. I remember being a kid and being like, oh my God, I just love her so much. Yeah, she was fantastic. But anyway, on to the 70s, where all horror movies grew sideburns and wore bell-bottoms. 1972, Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things.
Yes!
Directed by
That's
Bob Clark.
on my list for the podcast.
It's one of my favorite movies because of how terrible it is.
And it's kind of splashes into the modern era of comedy and horror in a lot of ways. And that's really all I have on that. You know what? One thing is interesting. I didn't realize, not to not talk about movies and to talk about sitcoms, but The Addams Family, that was created by David Levy, and it aired in 1964. There were only 2 seasons.
Huh.
Did you realize that?
I did not.
I felt like it ran longer than that.
Right, but there were only 2 seasons. That kind of blows my mind.
Yeah,
So,
that's
I mean,
wild.
I feel like you could probably watch all of the Addams Family episodes in a weekend, I'll bet.
Yeah, I'll still catch reruns of the Addams Family sometimes.
Yeah, I love stuff like that. So anyway, I'm just kind of like wrapping it up around the 70s because I feel like once we get to the 80s, then we're talking about, all the fun, gory stuff that, you know, I love, all of that sort of
Ghostbusters
is shrouded in, oh my goodness, yes.
Great
absolutely.
example of horror comedy.
100%. So we kind of get into, what Kane was planning on discussing for us.
All right, so we're saying that the 70s is
The 80s.
when we start getting into modern. All right, so you've got more stuff for the 70s?
I mean, not really, because
Okay.
I would say that the big, the start of it, I would kind of, in the 70s, I would cite Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things.
Right.
If you're stopping at the 70s and we're moving on, I do feel like omitting the Rocky Horror Picture Show is a grievous error.
Well, no, I was going to keep in the 70s.
Oh, okay. I see.
I got some shit to talk about.
I left the musical out. I would have stuffed that in there, but I didn't realize we were going to talk about musicals.
Well, I mean, we're not just talking about, we're talking like Young Frankenstein.
Ooh, oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mel Brooks. Oh my God. How did I
definitely Mel Brooks.
sweep past that?
Because I want to talk about your era, JD. I don't want to just move into the modern era. And I'm not just doing this to fill content. I want to talk about that era. So
Let's do it. Let's do it.
so
Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, so the silent films up to the 70s, all right? Not a lot of gore. There's some. There's definitely some blood, and there's some scares, and there's some monsters and stuff like that. But
Ooh, gotcha.
Exactly. It's gotcha jokes,
Yeah.
Like I think there was
Right.
I think there was a movie, I can't remember what it's called, but there was a movie made for TV with Don Knotts, and he had to stay in a house overnight.
That sounds familiar. I've seen that.
I've looked all over for it, and I cannot fucking find it.
It sounds familiar because it goes back to the first silent
That's what
film
I'm
that I
saying.
talked
Yeah.
about. It's like hang
it's
out
a
in this house. You might
reoccurring
win
thing.
something.
Like it
Yeah.
pops up. Like Haunted Honeymoon, like all that stuff.
Right.
It's all that kind of story, that trope.
That's why I bantered on about that initial film, because I just feel like
Yeah,
that got
it
the
finds
ball
itself-
rolling.
The Ghost and Mr. Chicken.
Ghost and Mr. Chicken.
Bingo.
God damn it.
What a great title.
It's a really good horror comedy, and it has a lot of really fun effects in it, like floating objects. And
I remember seeing it around Halloween when I was a kid.
every Halloween.
Yeah.
You can pretty much find it every Halloween.
Because it's wholesome enough to play on regular TV stations.
Exactly. Yeah. So So that's where the era, you get into children shouldn't play with dead things.
Mm-hmm.
There's really not a lot of gore in that movie.
Right. Not so much.
Honestly, there's not a lot of monsters until like the last 10 minutes of the film. Everything up to that is all just really stupid and like build up,
Yeah.
about actors making a movie.
Right.
So, I mean, you get to that stage, and you've got 1972 Tales from the Crypt. You've got the Vault of Horror. You've got a lot of really interesting additions to the horror canon, but a lot of funny shit happens in there, right? Then we get to Young fucking Frankenstein.
Right.
And that goes straight comedy.
Yeah, that's
like
a full-on...
It is one of the funniest movies ever. It doesn't have a lot of scares in it. I mean, maybe for a younger audience, there could be some scary parts in it, but the movie's not made for a younger audience.
Hell no.
Almost all of the jokes are very much so meant for grown-ups.
Right.
They were sexual in nature. I remember the scene where they were sort of like referring to Frankenstein's monster's genitals.
Yes.
And I remember seeing that as a kid and like that making me aware of my own genitals and being like,
JD,
interesting.
Did Young Frankenstein give you your sexual awakening?
It may have.
Yeah. Okay.
That's not a bad route to take
No, it's not.
your
It's fantastic.
into oneself. I just remember like looking down there and being like, oh my goodness.
What's that thing?
But I mean, I'll say that the emphasis on comedy, I think, was more prevalent in the early era of horror comedy.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
It was mostly sight gags for the horror, and then it was just a standard comedy movie. Like you look through and you follow
the stars are comedians themselves,
Exactly. Yeah.
Then as you got into kind of the 80s, that's when it really started to blend.
We'll talk first about Rocky Horror Picture Show because I think it's one of the few movies that's still in the before times when facilities to view movies were open to the public.
Yeah.
You would be able to go every Saturday or every Friday to a fucking screening of Rocky Horror Picture Show. And there's a whole culture behind that. We'll probably need to cover that movie at some point.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It doesn't really fall under the butcher block cleaver,
But it's cool enough to just
it's a
we
good
should
thing
talk
to
about
talk
it.
about because
And there's a lot to talk about.
it's forcing inclusivity.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I went to a Rocky Horror Picture Show, I was 16. And when the people acting out the roles, when they were introducing the film and whatnot, and they were finding out, who was a virgin and all that stuff, the first things that they said were, if you are offended by gay sex, get the fuck out of here.
Sure.
Because this is queer and we're happy about it.
Right.
And that was in fucking Cincinnati, Ohio.
Right. Yeah.
Which is a shit ass city for minorities and for anyone that's different. So real quick. So Young Frankenstein, it's not just comparable. I think it's probably better than the Abbott and Costello.
Oh, yeah. Like that might be just a generational thing. Like maybe I respond more to the jokes of Young Frankenstein.
Well, Young Frankenstein's just better. Yeah. I think it's just better overall. Like, it's a better comedy. It's a better movie.
Right.
Then you have, Rocky Horror Picture Show, which isn't necessarily a horror film really at all, in my opinion.
No, but it's specifically referencing the language of horror films.
It is. And there's a lot of references to other horror movies that you can dive into for that movie.
I think we're at a point too, like in history, at least just across all genres, where like there is really nothing shocking. And so something like Young Frankenstein would be more relatable to us as opposed to an Abbott Costello or even anything comedy and horror prior to that, just because of the subject matter itself. It's, you know what I mean? They're like not really shying away from anything. And then I think as all of this kind of goes forward, it just gets more and more explicit.
Yeah,
absolutely. No, I totally agree with that. Because when you start moving into, like they ended up redoing The Cat and the Canary again in 1979.
Oh, wow. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah.
That sucker made its way from silent film era. That's madness.
I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see it again at some point.
2022, The Cat and the Canary.
Yeah, it seems like a good way. But I mean, Motel Hell, American Werewolf in London.
I love Motel Hell.
Those, Christmas Evil. Those movies were intentionally supposed to be tongue-in-cheek comedy horror, right?
Oh, yeah.
So then we move to what I like to refer to as the accidental comedy horror.
Which is my favorite comedy horror, honestly.
So Evil Dead and the sequels and TV show that ended up coming out. The Evil Dead was not originally meant to be a comedy.
Not so much.
They thought they were making a scary movie. They were told that once the blood starts,
Once the blood starts oozing.
Yeah, once the blood starts, it doesn't stop. It just pours down the screen. And there's even like a reference to that, which ends up being pretty goddamn funny when you know that somebody told them when the blood starts, it needs to be running down the screen. There's actually a scene with blood running down the screen, and I think that's pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, new actors. They were all inexperienced. New filmmaker. I mean, they had been making Super 8 films for fucking ever. But they hadn't done like real fucking movies.
Right.
But then on top of that, I don't want to talk about Evil Dead the whole time. You've got things like The Munsters' Revenge, where you're seeing like the original cast from The Munsters trying to kind of be thrown back into American culture again. Right.
I think Peter Jackson with his splatter trilogy in the 80s, that was pretty straightforward comedy horror. It might have been unintentional, but if you think about like Meet the Feebles or Bad Taste.
Bad Taste was absolutely on purpose. Mm-hmm. There's no way that he did Bad Taste as this is going to be real horror. There's no way.
Right.
And the same thing with Dead Alive.
Yeah, Dead Alive definitely meant to be a comedy.
I was obviously supposed to have funny shit in it. I've never thought of the Meet the Feebles as horror comedy.
I'd push it toward horror because of the level of gore, though.
Yeah, but it's mostly gross out.
Right.
It's not specifically, this isn't scary stuff that's happening. It's just gross stuff that's happening.
Sure. And it's so over the top that it becomes funny.
Yeah, it's just really gross. We've already covered Creepshow, but that definitely has some tongue-in-cheek aspects to it.
Mm-hmm.
I want my birthday.
Yeah.
That shit is funny.
Yeah,
Creepshow's I can hold my breath for a long, long time. Like, that shit's funny.
Yeah.
That's not scary.
Steeped in irony.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And Stephen King wrote that. So it's like we're coming back to, that kind of thing. I don't want to go through every fucking movie.
You can if you want.
I'm not going to. I'm going to focus on some things that I think are important to discuss. So we've got Reanimator, Gremlins, and Return of the Living Dead, right?
What about The Goonies?
The Goonies is not horror.
What about Ghostbusters?
Ghostbusters is definitely horror.
We'll get to that. All right, we'll get to that. Ghostbusters was definitely horror comedy, right? It was made by comedians. It's obviously a horror comedy.
Harold Ramis is so wonderful.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about when we start getting into gross puppets covered in stuff.
I love puppets
gore.
covered in stuff.
Hell yeah. Who doesn't?
Is when you start moving further on, because, Transylvania 65000 is a great horror comedy, but there's nothing gory in it. It's like it's from that bygone era, But then you start getting into movies like Critters and House and that kind of shit. You're getting the gore and like shocking stuff from horror movies, but it's all really tongue-in-cheek. It's all really silly.
Right. Like the Ghoulies with a goofy little puppet. On the cover of the VHS, even there's a little guy poking out of the toilet holding something sharp.
Right, like the inspiration for Slither, Night of the Creeps.
There's another great example.
So I think another interesting one to kind of focus on for a second would be how Texas Chainsaw Massacre is not a horror comedy. There's nothing about that is funny. It's a really disturbing, awesome, scary movie.
Right.
But Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2?
Oh, yeah.
That gets pretty funny, yeah.
That movie's bananas.
It is. You play it on the radio. You play that slaughter on the radio. It's a dog-eat-dog world. And from where I'm sitting, there just ain't enough damn dogs. Really? Okay. You sold me.
Texas Chainsaw 2 is wild.
That's so
It
great.
is. It's fucking insane. And it's great.
Dennis Hopper was so awesome.
Everybody was awesome.
That's true.
Bill Moseley, fantastic. Everybody in that movie is just fucking bananas, and it was awesome. It was great.
Beautiful.
But I will say that, because that kind of horror, especially in the B era, the B section of horror movies, kind of clung to what I would say Evil Dead brought out. They're doing the gore. They're doing the kind of slapstick, silly shit.
Sure.
But then we get to enter into like the late 80s and we get like Beetlejuice, and we get one of my favorite things that has ever existed. We get Elvira.
Oh, yeah.
And we kind of backtrack a little bit. We're not looking at gore. We're looking at absurdity, and we're looking at camp.
Right.
And so it's not as much focusing on gore. It's more focusing on camp. It's, Beetlejuice is a great example of that. Some of the shit in Beetlejuice scared the fuck out of me when I was a kid.
Right.
So the two ghosts, they come out and their faces are all fucked up from what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that shit scared me when I was a little kid.
There's some creepy moments in that movie for sure.
Exactly.
I still loved Otho, the interior designer.
Yeah.
He was just like, you read my mind.
Yes.
Now I want to watch Beetlejuice.
So you start getting into when you start getting into later movies, I think more focus gets put on the comedy again and less on the horror.
Sure.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I would wonder what the country was going through at the time. It seemed to kind of coincide with how fucking gory the movies were.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that.
Because after the Vietnam War, because after World War II, there's the scary, like, silver screen, that kind of stuff. That's when Abbott and Costello are out there.
Right.
Yep.
And the horrors of World War II required levity.
Sure.
I'm not saying that this is, I haven't done research on film theory connected to events in American history.
We're big world events, right?
World events. But if you look at what movies are coming out when, there's definitely a lightheartedness to the stuff that's coming out from like 1945 up until the 70s.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And then once you get past that, and you start to get into the late 70s and the early 80s, we start seeing a lot of gore. And that's when stuff is just kind of gross, which adds to the funny because it's so ridiculous. Honestly, though, it doesn't really get crazy and change too much. Like, it just kind of stays stagnant. There's a lot of remakes, there's a lot of sequels, and it all kind of follows the same thing.
Right.
Like even Ghostbusters 2. It's really not a great movie at all.
Sure. Like I have like a nostalgia fondness for Ghostbusters too, but objectively, yeah, maybe not.
I mean, look at Gremlins. Gremlins and Ghostbusters, the original movies, are beautiful, fantastic movies. They're classics, right?
Gremlins 2, the new batch, not a good movie.
No, and honestly, neither is Ghostbusters 2.
Sure.
I did love the big ghost man in the painting. I forget his name, but...
Vigo.
Oh, Vigo, that's right. Had a sweet fucking cape, I will say that much.
Why don't you have a sweet fucking cape, JD?
How do you know I don't?
That's true.
It's a good point.
You can't see me. I'm wearing my cape right now.
Because JD doesn't know how to use Discord, so we can't do video.
Well, it's not only that I don't know how to use it, it's that I don't want to use it. That's really, I think, where my heart's at on that one.
Yeah, well, eat a bag of dicks.
No.
Nom, nom, nom.
Exactly.
Oh.
I think that a movie that we should look at would be Arachnophobia.
Oh, I love Arachnophobia.
Arachnophobia was a fantastic horror comedy.
Great cast.
Yes, that had, I think, really good, strong elements of actual fear-inducing moments.
Right.
John Goodman was in that, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
He always makes for a good comedy.
He does.
I like John Goodman, and he's kind of underrated in a lot of ways.
Is he, though?
Maybe that's just my experience. But I always feel like John Goodman isn't spoken of as highly by like popular culture as he should be. Like, I think he's kind of dismissed as the dad from Roseanne.
Really?
That's my feeling.
It's so strange, because I mean, that's a whole other thing. We don't, that's a whole other podcast.
Sure. Can we just make a John Goodman podcast?
A John Goodman podcast?
I think we should.
Answer in the comments if you want Brainworms presents the John Goodman cast.
All 5 of us just talking about John Goodman. We just hash it out.
Just
from
talking about John
birth
Goodman.
to current day.
Yeah. Talking about his filmography.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm into it. I'm here for it.
Let's do it.
But I mean, I think that there's so many, like from 1972, when children shouldn't play with dead things, till 2021, there's too many goddamn horror comedy movies for me to even begin. Even to just pick my favorites, is obnoxious. There's just so much, and there's just so much happening that I just don't think that I can do it and us not have a 2.5 hour podcast.
Sure.
So I think that what it's important to talk about is the creme de la creme of horror comedy and how I don't know that it'll ever be met.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, and I've said this before, Shaun of the Dead.
Oh, hell yeah.
At least currently, I don't see anyone making a movie that competes with how good Shaun of the Dead is.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys remember Fido?
I do.
do.
Not as good as Shaun of the Dead.
Well, I wasn't about to make that argument, but I wanted to name the movie and throw it into the mix because we hadn't named it yet. And I think that was what, in the 90s?
No. Fido was 2006.
Oh, shit. Well, it feels like a 90s film.
It does kind of have a 90s energy to it.
Yeah, it had that sort of flavor, 90s flavored.
Well, I mean, even like when you get to the like third or fourth Child's Play,
Right.
it's just horror comedy.
Sure. Bride of Chucky.
Definitely. But, you know, the thing that I think that kind of holds these movies together is the fact that the reason that horror comedy is so important and why it plays such an important role in cinema is the fact that humans are deathly afraid of death.
Right.
Sure.
Humans and mortality don't mix. They don't like it. And being able to, for, you know, an hour and 20 minutes or something like that, to be able to see other people laughing in the face of death, or they themselves getting to laugh in the face of death, is a cathartic experience that only horror comedy can provide.
Right.
It was designed by our egos to protect us.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right at the beginning, we talked about, you know, the kind of folk tales about tricking the devil. And I think that kind of plays into that. You know, people, you know, get into like folklore and myth because they're trying to put into language the things about the universe that they don't understand. And I think that finding absurdity in dark places kind of feeds into that.
I think the origin of Halloween, the thought process into that is also part of it. The level of fun and playfulness in that all sort of lends itself to setting the stage for horror in comedy and vice versa.
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, even today, if you have a Shudder, I should stop fucking pimping them. But if
they're not paying us, Kane.
Yeah, there's a streaming service that I love, and the streaming service has produced they're fucking amazing. That's all I can say about it. But there's Scare Package and Satanic Panic. There's so many horror comedies that are out there right now that are just pure gold.
Sure.
And I think that not enough people...
I got a scare package for you.
Nice.
Is it herpes?
I like to call it happies.
Do you hear like cute nicknames like the Herps?
Herps, yeah.
But yeah, I think we've said enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did we get an episode? Do we have an episode?
Do we have a conclusion?
Well, I mean, I think the conclusion is that...
It's herpes.
It's herpes. It's the herps. Yeah, so I mean, if you look at like Devil's Night or Cabbage Night or things like that, and then you come upon a movie like Trick or Treat.
Right.
I mean, technically it's Trick or Treat, but it's spelled fucking Trick or Treat. And it
Right.
bothers
It's kind of
me.
weird.
Yeah, it's a bad way to spell that.
But that movie kind of covers the kind of rules of Halloween in a very humorous but horrific way.
Mm.
And as you move on, you start to see more modern movies are delving into tropes, you know, like Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
Right.
I love that movie.
I bounced off of it, but I might try to watch it again at some point.
I'll watch it with you. I haven't seen it.
Sure.
And it really takes on the trope of kids in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
That's common in a bunch of horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
And this flips it on its head.
Right.
And it's really funny.
Sure. Even the Scream series is kind of a dissection of the slasher movie trope in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, and as time has gone on, that's what we see more of
Sure.
in the horror comedy genre of films. Now you're getting movies like The Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse, The Dead Don't Die. You know, you're getting these kind of just looking at serious horror films and then making jokes about it. Like Zombievers.
Mm.
Dude, like that's...
Yeah, Zombievers is very stupid.
Americans are zombie obsessed.
Mhm.
And so it's almost like a spitting in the eye to make these movies that make fun of zombie
Sure.
movies, basically. But I think as we go on, you know, it's important that we have those, because if we didn't have our Ghostbusters, then watching Poltergeist might not be that great.
Right. I agree.
You know, and having stupid slasher movies like that.
Mhm. Basically the entire Full Moon Films catalog.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It gives us that separation that's necessary to really appreciate the actual scary movies that we encounter.
I agree.
And that's really all I have to say about that. Real quick, my favorite horror comedy movie ever is Shaun of the Dead.
Yes.
Joe, what is your favorite horror comedy movie?
Probably also Shaun of the Dead, honestly.
Yeah, you're allowed to have the same.
Right, yeah. Like, I was kind of thinking about it, like, Ghostbusters comes real close.
Right.
Depending on what mood I'm in that day, I might say Ghostbusters, I might say Shaun of the Dead. Those are definitely my top two.
And then JD, what is your favorite horror comedy?
Ah, man, I got this thing for Bill Murray and anything that he appears in that is horror related. And I think of Scrooged. I'm not going to say that that's my favorite, but there are some awesome moments.
I love Scrooge so much.
Awesome moments in that movie. Zombieland. That's another. It's like I didn't love the movie until all of a sudden Bill Murray was alive and well, but pretending to be a zombie. That for me just fucking made it so great. And I'm glad that we mentioned that because I feel like that's noteworthy. I was going to mention, when you guys talked about Scream, I don't know that we referenced it at all, but the Scary Movie film series.
Sure. Those movies are very stupid, and I kind of bounce off of the humor.
Yeah.
I don't really like those movies either.
I've dismissed most of them. There's a few moments in them that kind of...
Yeah, I don't really consider... I mean, I know they technically are horror comedies, but I just don't find the horror in them.
Right.
Like, it's just really rough, vulgar.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate vulgarity, but it's just vulgar slapstick. There's nothing smart about it.
14-year-old boy jokes.
Yeah. Oh, wait, shit. JD, did you tell us what your favorite horror comedy was?
Just anything that's spooky with Bill Murray in it.
Okay, fair.
Ghostbusters, Scrooged, Zombieland.
Basically, it's
just Bill Murray. I just follow
Nice.
Bill Murray around.
Bill
yeah,
Murray.
pretty much.
Bill Murray's your favorite horror comedy.
Yeah.
I feel that.
Okay, well, folks, if there's a particular horror comedy movie that you think is must see, let us know what it is. We'll probably watch it. If we have seen it and we think it's shit, I will probably say that it was shit.
Yeah.
Is The Stuff considered a horror comedy? Because I laughed my ass off during that movie.
Yeah, I think The Stuff holds up as horror comedy.
That might be my favorite then. I know Bill Murray's not in The Stuff, but there was enough for me to laugh about in that film.
I mean, The Stuff is definitely a funny movie. I don't know if it was intended to be. It might be like an Evil Dead situation.
Sure.
Where they tried to make a serious, scary movie and it didn't work.
Yeah, it sort of slipped on a banana peel.
All right, so if you watch a particular horror comedy every year, just to refresh the old brain meat on it, let us know what it is. We're always happy to talk about that. Aside from that, you can find us at wegiveyobrainworms.com and make sure if you're listening to this on YouTube, that you give us a like, a follow, a subscribe, and
a
click
back
the
rub.
bell. And
Yeah.
if you didn't know this already, if you've listened this far, but you're about to turn this off, there's always a funny quip.
It's true. It's always a little Easter egg at the end.
And if you've already turned it off, you don't know.
Yeah.
You have no fucking clue right now. And that's funny to me that there are lots of people that miss that little quip at the end of every episode.
In fact, if you're in the comments, if you're a YouTube listener and you've listened all the way to the end, comment with the funny thing so that we know that you've listened all the way through.
I think that sounds good.
Did we plug the Patreon? I feel like that's important.
Give us your money!
Yeah. We've got a Patreon, and any support you give us through the Patreon gets fed back into the podcasts,
It's true.
because that's the kind of dudes that we are.
Yep. Mostly it keeps JD in jelly beans and bubble gum so that he can keep his blood sugar up and be as high energy as we like him to be.
I actually achieve that with coffee. Copious amounts of
Yeah.
coffee. And that's often why
right,
I have
I'm gonna press the
to
thing.
take
Yeah.
multiple piss breaks.
And stop.
Abbott and Costello meet and literally every fucking universal monster there is.